So thank you again for joining. My name is Russell Karras. I am the Senior Vice President, Head of Commodities here at Xpansiv. Xpansiv is the leading infrastructure provider for environmental commodities. We're well known for carbon markets and renewable energy credits, but we also work with kind of pioneers and leaders in the next generation of environmental commodities. And when we think about a market that's moving through that product life cycle and is really ready to start to execute on exchange in a marketplace, we're excited about collection and recycling credits around plastics. So moving on to the next slide, please. So I'm joined today by a really great group of panelists that represent different aspects. So I'll be discussing a little bit about marketplaces and infrastructure on the technology side for the plastic credit, kind of the emerging plastic credit market. And then we're joined by Nicole Dewing from the Africa Carbon and Commodities. So Nicole is a co-founder of the ACC and is dedicated her life to sustainable change enterprises. She's been in Senegal for nearly 20 years now, and she manages all the operational aspects of the ACC as well as the plastics credit program. So we'll hear firsthand from a developer that's on the ground and active in building the first plastic credit project out of Africa. Next, we have Kristen Linscott from Verra. So Kristen works as a manager supporting policy and market engagement for Verra's plastic waste reduction program. Again, relatively new program when we think about renewable energy credit programs and associated registries, as well as voluntary carbon. But Kristen's been working on this program for over 3 years, so she really has a wealth of knowledge around plastic credits. And then finally, we have Jacopo Vicetti, who's the co-founder of Aether, which is a leading trading and development company in environmental commodities. He's also a professor of climate finance at the Polytech University of Turin, and advisor to the Italian government on economic impacts of climate change. So we have a unique perspectives here from a developer, from a standards body, and from the trading and marketing side. And I can move to the next slide, please. What we'll do is we'll run through high level the plastic pollution challenge. Why do we need this market? Why do we need additional ways to help finance these projects? Kristen will walk through again, some more background in terms of why Verra has really looked at this space and has dedicated time and resources to it, and then the standard itself. How is it structured? We'll look at the Deekali Plastics Credits Project, which again is the first Verra project to issue plastic credits out of Africa, and Nicole and Jacopo will walk through the project, how it's structured, how it's financed, what role credits play, both from the project developer side as well as from the market and trading side. And then we'll look at the market infrastructure around plastic credits. Where do plastics sit kind of in the commodity product life cycle? Where do we see that moving with this effort, with the Deekali project to start? And then how do we see that progressing in the future? And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. So please move to the next slide. So big picture, this is almost a cause that needs no introduction. Everyone is aware of the massive issue we have in terms of plastic pollution, and that it's not something that's static. It's actually projected to triple by 2050, with one truckload of plastics dumped into the ocean every minute. And we know that we need to look for alternative solutions. We know this is a place where market-based mechanisms should be utilized, because what we're doing today and how we're addressing this program clearly is not enough. 9%, only 9% of plastics are actually recycled. And it's not just about plastics and recycling. There's also an emissions factor as well, as plastics could represent up to 15% of the carbon budget by 2050. So this is a significant problem. We're all aware of it. We really need to think about kind of new and innovative ways to address it. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kristen. She'll talk a little bit more in depth about this crisis that we have on our hands and how Verra has structured programs around it. So Kristen, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I have been asked to just share a little bit more from our perspective at Verra. So to begin, I can introduce who we are for those who don't know us. On the next slide, we have a list of all of our programs. For hopefully many of you already know us as a nonprofit standard setter. We've been operating since 2007, and through our suite of standards programs, we enable the credible, transparent, and robust assessment of projects driving environmental and social change. Today, there's over 2,000 projects in more than 95 countries that use our programs to gain access to important climate and sustainable development finance. Today, I'm going to be really focused on Verra's plastic program, which is our newest one, and telling you more about how that works and how plastic credits can help scale collection and recycling across the world. But first, I want to dig in a little bit more into why we put attention to this. So on the next slide, we have some stats that build on what Russell just shared further. There are many stats, that I think show the enormity of the plastic pollution challenge. We know that there are over 400 million tons of plastic produced every year. But unfortunately, the waste management systems don't always exist to be able to manage this plastic that is produced and prevent it from becoming pollution. So we hear stats like 14 million tons of plastic are leaking into our oceans each year. And we also know that plastic leakage is especially bad in developing countries. I think the OECD said 86% of plastic leakage occurs in these developing countries, which just highlights that vulnerable geographies and communities are disproportionately affected by plastic pollution. And these same countries are going to require significant amount of finance. Some estimate $10 billion in additional finance per year to be able to truly eliminate plastic leakage and get funding that's needed to invest in recycling capacity, waste sorting, collection, and treatment, which just emphasizes the need for a multitude of tools to be able to direct finance to these really important activities. And the last thing I wanted to highlight, while not specific to maybe like plastic pollution, it is still very relevant to plastic waste management and how we address pollution. There are over 20 million informal waste workers around the world, and these are essential to collection and recycling systems in many countries. But unfortunately, we know many of them are subjected to dangerous or unsafe working conditions due to the informal nature of their work, which is why another big priority of our program is to help ensure that through our requirements and the projects that are meeting our requirements, we set up safeguards that help improve the livelihoods and working conditions for those involved in collection and recycling. So now that I've given a little bit more context, I'll get into speaking about our program itself. I like to talk about the standard, but also credits. Like as a standard setter, we're very focused on the rules and requirements that underpin our programs. So in the case of the plastic program, that's the plastic standard, and then the two methodologies that we have. One is for collection, one is for recycling. And this is what sets out the uniform framework for measuring and monitoring project impacts. And these requirements also incorporate those social and environmental safeguards that I've alluded to already. And then the output is projects that are audited to meet these requirements are able to issue plastic credits for their activities. And these credits can be used to then finance projects, these same projects that are scaling up plastic waste collection and recycling in the areas that they operate. So on this next slide, we have a nice diagram that I hope brings it all together, because sometimes people can't quite track all of the different roles, and it's great that on today's webinar, we have a variety of perspectives to share. So if we're starting at the top, again, Verra, we're the ones that set the standard. We don't develop the projects. We don't sell the credits. We write the rules and requirements and set up the system and registry that is needed to issue these credits. So collection and recycling projects across the world are able to use our standard. And by that, I mean they show how they are meeting our requirements. They actually document this through quite a process where they show how their project is meeting each of our respective requirements, and something called a project description. I won't get much more into the details past that. But a project shows how they're meeting our requirements. They have to get third-party audited by a validation and verification body to assess their conformance with these requirements. And then following Verra's review and final approval of the project, we will issue them plastic credits for every ton of plastic waste they collect or recycle. And these are presented on our public registry, thus supporting transparency in the market and allowing anyone interested in the credit to see a lot of the information that sits behind the project itself. And these plastic credits then allow businesses or whatever organization is interested in making credible investments in plastic waste management to do so. And their certification gives them the confidence that they are contributing to verifiable and traceable collection and recycling outcomes because they know the project has been certified and third-party audited against an independent standard. And that security, as well as just the mechanism itself, means that money then will get back to the projects on the ground to help them scale in the collection or recycling activities that they're involved in. On the next slide, I'll spend just a few moments highlighting a few key aspects of our program. So it's global, meaning projects across the world can use it, and it has been designed to be flexible to work for a variety of different projects depending on the local scenario so that they can actually be designed based on what those communities need in terms of collection and recycling. All projects are going to have to show that they're additional, meaning they're doing something above the baseline scenario. They're meeting those social and environmental safeguards for things like fair and equitable wages, the health and safety of the workers involved in the project, environmental safeguards related to air, soil, and water quality, etc. And they again have to be third-party audited to show how they meet these. So as I round out, I just want to highlight on the next slide, just speak about plastic credits themselves. So moving forward, you can see one plastic credit represents 1 ton of plastic that's been collected or recycled And these credits are then an investment mechanism that can finance plastic waste collection and recycling activities. It allows those who purchase them to strengthen waste management infrastructure, complement their upstream targets and actions around plastic pollution, and then enables the support of projects that are improving livelihoods and workers' health and safety. And we do have 2 types of plastic credits, which I wanted to highlight on this next slide. A waste collection credit, as the name suggests, represents 1 ton of waste that's been collected and then deposited in one of the in destinations that the methodology considers appropriate. And a waste recycling credit is 1 ton of waste that's been recycled. And by this, we're trying to promote that closed loop recycling. So we want the recycling output to be able to displace virgin plastic and be able to reduce our reliance on virgin streams of plastic instead. So that gives you a little bit of an overview. And the last thing I just wanted to highlight is kind of a map of the projects using the program today. There are over 50 projects that are listed, meaning they're in the process of registering, maybe being verified or validated or undergoing that final review by Verra. and 18 other projects that have been registered. You're going to get to hear from the Deekali Project, which is one of those registered projects, which I think is great because it gives you an actual example to connect to a plastic credit project and understanding what the impact on the ground is. But for now, I just, leave you with that. And I'm very happy to pass it over to Jacopo, who will speak more about the Deekali Plastic Credit Project.
Jacopo, I believe you are on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't notice that.
Perfect.
So thank you, Kristen, for handing it over to me. And so today we're going to take a look at the Deekali Plastic Credit Project, which is a project which has been developed in Senegal, a country with a very poor waste management system in place, if at all, and where, of course, plastic is one of the main elements that you can find in the environment, unfortunately. With that being said, we're gonna dig into literally a little bit of what ACC does and how, as well, plastic credits can contribute to solving part of this issue. So ACC is a project developer, mainly focused on West Africa, with a base in Senegal. And it focuses on, especially on project linked to plastic pollution, which is, I would say, one of the main problems in those economies. All of West Africa is strongly affected by plastic waste, zero management, and therefore you can literally find plastic everywhere in the environment, be that in cities, but unfortunately, mostly also on the coastal sides of Senegal and the rest of West Africa, as well as on rivers and on the mangroves that populate the areas, Senegal and down the coast to Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, and so on. But let's focus on Senegal for the moment because that's where the project is. Mainly, what we do is we help companies address their plastic footprint with engaging in activities in and or around plastic collection and upcycling. But plastic credits are really I would say a new tool in this fight against plastic, because they enable to actually be more precise in the activities that are taken on by companies like ourselves, and be able to measure and then therefore quantify very more precisely with very precise process how this plastic is then dealt with in those environments. But on the next slides, I'll show you exactly what the key principles are of a plastic credit. So credit represents, as Kristen said, 1 ton of plastic, which has been either collected or recycled at any given moment into the project process. How this is done is normally, and how this is done is certified, is similar to if you're accustomed to a carbon credit. The plastic is quantified, is analyzed. You go through a methodology, which Verra has already updated once and updates regularly based on all the inputs. You get the process of collecting and recycling the plastic gets certified by a third party. And once all the checks have been performed and all parties are satisfied with the results, it gets listed on the Verra registry, and therefore these credits can then be, of course, used to address the residual plastics waste that companies do have. How exactly this works is very important to understand, and why plastic credits are so important, especially in sub-Saharan African communities, but not only. I would say everywhere poor management systems for waste, and in particular for plastics, also where there's no regulation for plastics, because we have to consider that plastic is a permanent element once thrown into the environment, takes hundreds of years to disappear, and unfortunately ends up everywhere, both in the water but also in our food chain. Let's think about fishes and other animals. But exactly what are the benefits of a carbon credit, of a plastic credit, excuse me? Plastic credits enable to basically transfer much needed finance to those economies where the public sector actually plays little to no role in differentiating waste in the first place, but even worse, addressing the issue of plastic. So therefore, having many countries with absolutely no policy, and unfortunately, in many cases also no finance or little finance to address that problem because there's other priorities in the country. Environmental finance, like in this case, so with plastic credits, enable to transfer this finance to third parties who actually implement projects where they're much needed. Your money, basically, as a plastic credit buyer, goes to fund a project of this type, and with all the verification in place, basically transfers you the benefits of claiming, what has been done on the ground and for the benefit of the communities involved in these kind of projects. I'll pass it on now to Nicole, which is going to dig deeper into the process of this project and how exactly these projects work and where the money goes, because I think this is very important to understand.
Thank you, Jacobo. I'm very honored and grateful to be able to introduce an impactful project, the Deekali Plastic Recovery Waste Project. Just on a side, the word Deekali comes from Wolof, and Wolof is the most spoken language in Senegal. And Deekali means giving a second life, giving a new life. So that's why we named it the Deekali Project. We're also very proud that it's the first plastic credit project registered in Africa, and also it's a least developed country, which I have to note makes it working in a least developed country. I've been there for 20 years in Senegal and also along the west coast of Africa, is very challenging, to say the least, because the systems, as Jacobo mentioned, are informal. There is an inadequate solid waste management systems and infrastructure in Senegal specifically, and the work by the waste collectors and the recycling is set up in an informal system. So the plastic credits standard that Verra has established is very strict, and so our job is to go in and allow our partners to be able to obtain plastic credits to be able to meet those strict standards of Verra and to help formalize the solid waste management systems that are in place or not even in place in some areas, and to be able to increase the infrastructure and also provide a tracking mechanism for the plastic waste that's removed from the environment as well as the plastic waste that's repurposed or recycled. The Deekali project specifically is accredited for the first 7 years between 2016 and 2022. We're just now going through the renewal of the second crediting period from 2023 to 2029. In fact, this Friday we start our virtual audit, and then in February of 2025 we'll be doing the on-site audits, which are very rigorous, and doing so that will allow us to have 2023 and 2024 verified and obtain plastic credits from those years. We have in the Deekali project a total of 5,216 plastic recycled credits and 4,075 plastic collection credits, for a total of 9,291 plastic credits for the Deekali project, which is basically the amount of plastic that's been removed from the environment, collected and repurposed above the baseline. And of the plastic that's been repurposed and collected, we have HDP, PP, and PVC, which I'll go into a little bit later. And that is recycled into plastic chips, which then is sold to plastic manufacturing companies in Senegal, and also has been exported in some cases abroad to countries in Europe. And those plastic chips are going to replace virgin plastic. And also in 2022, the Deekali project started to compress the plastic chips through a heat compressor into plastic lumber. So basically, plastic lumber is anything that you can do with wood lumber, you can make out of plastic lumber. So we've made school desks, tables, chairs, all types of furniture, even windowsills from the plastic lumber. There's a project in place that is creating ecological housing using the plastic lumber. So that started in 2022, and we're very excited about that part of the project. We've also, looking at the Deekali project, we've created over 350 jobs in the collection and the recycling sector. And focusing on the environmental end of it, we've been able to decrease open burning of plastic waste over 18%. Burning of plastic waste and waste in general in Senegal is very common as a way of, some people would say, managing waste, which is not an acceptable way of managing the waste. As we all know, the toxic fumes from the plastic are very harmful to human health. And out of that, we've been able to avoid 21,845 tons of CO2 emissions have been avoided by recycling the plastic. And I'm happy to go into that in more detail if anyone has questions on that. Looking on to the next slide. Why Senegal? Why did we choose Senegal? Obviously, one of the reasons is because ACC is based in Dakar, Senegal, but we also work along the west coast of Africa, is because there's urgent action needed. Senegal has a population of 17 million people, but it's about the size of North Dakota, a state in the United States. So if you're familiar with that, it's a pretty small country size-wise, and is projected to produce over 700,000 metric tons of mismanaged plastic waste by 2025. So frankly, we could say even today, we're almost in 2025, that is how much mismanaged waste is in Senegal, and out of that, over 35% ends up in the ocean. So Senegal is ranked as the 21st polluter of ocean plastic in the world, and that's pretty amazing for such a small country. Another important statistic is in the United States, according to the same study, in 2025, there'll be 337,000 metric tons of mismanaged waste. So to think that obviously the United States produces much more plastic waste than Senegal, but it manages it better. And for someone who lives back and forth between the US and Senegal, I can tell you for sure that in Senegal, the plastic waste is not well managed compared to the US. And that is why with a coastline of over 700 kilometers, a lot of that plastic waste ends up in the ocean. And the other important thing to note is that the longer the plastic remains in the environment, I think most of us know this, is that the greater damage it does. Why? Because it starts to degrade in the sun, which is a lot of sun in Senegal, into microplastics or nanoplastics, and then it gets into the soil. And as someone that owns an organic farm, I know the firsthand effects of the microplastics in the soil and the effect on the plants. But also, it gives it a greater opportunity, the plastic waste, to reach the ocean. So Senegal, when it rains, often has torrential rains during the rainy season, and a lot of that plastic waste, which is not managed, flows into the ocean. And so the most important thing about the Deekali project is that it directly supports the private sector. So plastic credits is a market-based approach, a private sector approach, I often say, which allows the private sector of manufacturing companies that manufacture plastic or use plastic are able to provide direct funding by buying plastic credits to our partners, specifically in Senegal, which are recycling companies, which allow them to upscale their activities. So going on to the next slide. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I hope you enjoyed the video, because we felt it was really important to talk about the social impact of the Deekali project. The environmental impact is quite obvious. You remove plastic waste out of the environment, you repurpose it, you recycle it, part of a circular economy. But the social impact is not always so evident. And just taking the case of Hassan Jain, who is the main collector in the video, 7 years ago, he was selling used shoes in the Chess open market, and he wasn't able to make ends meet. and he was getting ready to take the boat illegally to Spain, which is quite common in Senegal, unfortunately. And fortunately, a friend said to him, well, why don't you try collecting plastic waste? And he said, why would I do that? He says, just try it. So he started collecting plastic waste. Fast forward 7 years, he now employs 12 people. He's been able to build a home for his family, send his 6 children to school, also help support his brother's 5 children to go to school. He's bought a car. He's with the plastic credits planning to buy a truck to help transport the plastic easier. And he's been able to have a dignified life just from collecting plastic waste. And it's really important, the social impact, to understand, because in Senegal, statistically, up to 40% of the population is illiterate, and more than that is not formally educated. So the plastic waste collection through the plastic credit financing allows people who do not have a formal education, who are extremely intelligent and looking to support their families, a dignified and steady income. And I think that it's really important to also look at the fact that the Deekali Project has helped prevent illegal immigration to Europe. In interviewing the 4 young men that work for Hassim Jain, all 4 of them also had planned to take the boats to the Canary Islands, and fortunately started working for Hassim and said, we're able to make a living and we prefer to stay in Senegal because now we can support our families. And he also has 6 women that work for him directly that are able to send their children to school through the collection of plastic waste. So not only is there an environmental impact, but it also has a social impact, and both contribute to a circular economy. I'm looking at the next slide to introduce Jacobo and looking at carbon credits and how they differ and are similar to plastic credits.
Thank you, Nicole. Yep, so I'm just going to take over here because my experience in my first background was actually in the carbon credit space, and then jumping into the plastic credits. And I think that there's a number of differences and a number of similarities, which are important to be analyzed. Basically, the goal of both plastic credits and carbon credits are, to benefit the environment, right? One way or the other. One addresses, of course, carbon, and plastic addresses pollution from the plastic waste, which is abandoned or left into the environment. The goal, of course, that differs a bit with plastic credits, is that it does create a circular economy, meaning that waste unfortunately keeps on being dumped, although with education programs, that's also something that has been trying to be addressed in different communities, especially those that don't have waste management programs. But plastic credits really enable to create a circular economy, meaning that they create physical enterprises that can then start, both on the collection side and on the recycling side of plastic. The focus, of course, is on both sides, both for carbon and plastic credits, to directly reduce something. In our case, it's of course the plastic pollution, and therefore both waste and in another way is also to increase the capacity of the recycling factories that are present in the countries, formally or informally, in most cases, unfortunately, informally, and therefore enable local communities to upcycle more and more plastic. And why is that important and fundamental to the success of such programs is that you can collect as much plastic as you want, but if you don't have a program in order to recycle that plastic, then you're basically moving it from the environment to potentially a safer place, which is already a very good first step. But the best one is actually to give that plastic a second life, right? And this is literally what plastic credits have enabled us to do in those communities. The visibility of the impact is that's a main differentiator, which doesn't mean one is better than the other. It's simply visible and tangible immediately. And the reason is that if you take a walk, a stroll, and not only in Senegal, I have to say, I was in New York for Climate Week last week, and you take a walk and it was the weekend before the start of the week. You take a walk in Central Park, and you see a lot of people, unfortunately, abandoning their plastic bottles or plastic residues around the park. And these, of course, in New York get collected. Unfortunately, that's not the case in many other countries. So the impact, the visibility is immediate where these programs get implemented, for example, in Senegal, because in the areas which were once covered, literally covered in plastic, so you would try to reach the beach and you would have to jump over one basket of plastic, a bottle, a small bag, which basically populates half of the countryside. And just as a small reference, there's so many plastic bags being abandoned in Senegal that fly around, that there's this local joke that they call the black plastic bags the national bird of Africa. This is just to give you a rough idea of how much this is impactful, also visibly impactful for the people who live there and for the people who visit, right? So that the impacts are literally immediate and physically touchable. The challenges addressed, of course, are different, although I have to say that partially plastic credits do address the aspects of emissions, because as Russell said literally at the real beginning of this webinar, plastic contributes to 15% of the carbon budget globally in the world. So reducing plastic pollution does contribute to mitigate part of the effect of climate change. So it is very important to keep that in mind when we think, oh, we're just addressing plastic pollution. No, you're also addressing a lot of other factors. And last but not least, food security, because a lot of us eat fish, but not only, even if you eat meat, plastic goes into the soil or vegetables and pollutes basically everything. Latest studies for fishing have suggested that right now there's no fish who's not affected by plastic. So every time you eat fish, be that cooked or raw, it doesn't matter, you are eating part of plastic molecules. So this is really concerning so far. And the measuring unit here is basically the same, as we said. One is a physical ton of carbon being removed from the atmosphere or being prevented from entering the atmosphere. And with plastic credits, it's a plastic being removed from the environment. So I'll do this analogy, which I've heard last week, which I think is very, very, very interesting, is plastic credits are very similar to what a removal credit in the carbon space would be, right? You're literally physically removing the plastic from the environment and upcycling it, so giving it a second life. So I would call them removals, plastic removals, if you like. And that being said, I'll hand it over to Nicole.
And just a time check, Nicole, that we have about 15 minutes remaining in the webinar.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go very quickly again about plastic credits and the Deekali project specifically. I'm very grateful to live in Senegal and work on plastic credit projects, because I really can see the impact that I'm making. So I have not worked on carbon credit projects, but specifically I can say with plastic credit projects, you see the tangible impact, because the plastic is physically removed from the environment and it's repurposed, whether it's into plastic chips that is offsetting the virgin plastic, or into school desks that you physically bring to the schools and you know it's made from 100% recycled plastic. And I'm grateful also for Verra, because they have provided a standard that we're able to follow and implement in Senegal. And also our next project is along all of West Coast from Mauritania to Sierra Leone, the West Africa Coast Plastic Free Plastic Credit Project. And through the Verra standard, we're able to have a validated and verified project that, as we've mentioned many times, but I think it's very important to always focus on, is that we have an independent auditor come and audit and verify. I'm the one that actually wrote the PDD, the project design document for the Deekali project, and they'll come in and verify everything that I put in there. And I think that is very important. It holds you accountable. It holds you to a very specific standard. It's a very high standard. And it also provides, like in the business world, as a business owner, it provides you a standard that you know that you need to follow. And that's very important in the business world, to know what those standards are. So I'm grateful to be able to work on the Deekali project and the other plastic credit projects we're working on, and grateful also to have a standard of which to follow that I know is a verifiable and validated standard that provides us with plastic credits that are measurable. So just to finish off on the next slide, I'd like to talk about types of plastic very quickly that we are have been able to collect and recycle. It's polypropylene, PP, HDPE, high density polyethylene, and PVC, polyvinyl chloride. So those are the three plastics that we've recovered and collected from the environment. We can go on to the next slide. I think that speaks for itself. This slide is very important. Once you buy plastic credits, where does your money go? As someone that I would want to know that. Where does money go for purchasing the plastic credits in the Deekali project? First and foremost, it goes to the modernization of machinery. So our partners, the recycling companies, have pretty much antiquated machinery that's very not energy efficient. And the first thing that they need to do is upgrade their machinery to more energy efficient and better performing machinery that has a much higher capacity to recycle plastic. And we've been able to quantify that it would increase the yield by 50% of the machinery that they would build to increase their capacity of recycling. But it'll also increase the collection capacity by 30%. By putting in solar compressed containerized machines that will be able to compress the plastic so you can get more plastic in the trucks, which allow the trucks to go into hard to reach areas in Senegal. And that's a really important factor of the Deekali project and why plastic credits are needed. It also will help improve the waste pickers' income by up to 25%. They're on the margin of society and they're collecting waste. And the plastic credit project has helped improve already their working conditions, as you've seen from the video, but also the plastic credits, by purchasing them, will increase their income up to 25%, which is, to me, is one of the most important parts of this project, improving their lives, because they're a very, very important part of keeping the environment clean in Senegal from a hygienic and environmental standpoint. It also increased by 20% the recycling staff and improved the infrastructure for staff needs, everything from changing rooms at the recycling center to better bathroom facilities for the woman to be able to shower. Little thing, it sounds like a little thing, but that's actually a big thing. And it will establish a new production line for PET recycling. So PET, Senegal has also taken on, like the rest of the world, drinking water out of bottles, plastic bottles, and there is plastic bottles everywhere you go in Senegal. But we don't have the capacity right now to recycle the PET, so it would allow for purchasing machines that would recycle PET and turn them into flakes and allow them to offset virgin plastic. It will increase by 50% the protection of the recycled industrial lumber that we were talking about, that we're using to make school desks, tables, chairs, holders for cell phones, all kinds of things. It's pretty amazing what we've been able to manufacture out of the plastic lumber. And so that would be able to increase by 50% production. Also, I mentioned the 15 solar containerized compression units that either with the trucks or at the collection sites. That's a very important part of the plastic credit project. And another thing it's a minor thing, but it's also a very major thing, is to increase the capacity of the electrical transformers. So what that means is that the transformers that they have now in place are unable to take on a lot of electricity to operate the machines. So it's very expensive to increase the capacity of the electrical transformers in Senegal, and the plastic credit financing will go directly to that so that they can increase their capacity of recycling. There's also an efficient wastewater treatment system that's already in place, but we need to upgrade it and upscale it. And finally, installing 150 fixed collection points in the city of Dakar and the second largest city, Chess, where people can bring their plastic waste. There's so many people that need a place to bring their plastic waste because they're used to separating, but there is no separation in Senegal, so this would allow for that. So just going on to the final slide, really there's no time to waste. As Jacobo said it well, wherever you walk in Senegal, it's getting much better thanks to this project, but there is plastic waste everywhere, and a lot of it does end up in the ocean. And by financing, validating a verified plastic credit, for us, it's a great start to be able to engage your company in the global reduction efforts for plastic waste. And as we have underlined, Senegal is a major contributor to plastic waste in the ocean. So I know we're almost done, so I'll pass it over to Russell to finish the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Nicole. And I'll try to incorporate some of the questions as well. We have a little under 10 minutes, but really want to make sure it's clear to everyone, that you are financing a project. We hear so often, like, what do I get with these credits? And I'm glad that we had a really detailed discussion and great video as well. That was the documentary that was produced by Verra. We think about market infrastructure and how do we help scale this effort? We're not, you can't have a focused, marketing campaign for every project. We need to scale this significantly, really, to build this market and to impact the space in a meaningful way across Africa, across a variety, pretty much every region. This is Xpansiv's infrastructure, which is, we're a vertically integrated company, so we kind of represent every piece of the value chain to think about the kind of the life cycle of a credit. So Xpansiv develops the registry infrastructure for registries like Verra that then develop the programs and methodologies that sit on top of it. And we also have a meta registry called Xpansiv Connect that is into 14, kind of growing, that helps kind of aggregate that information and lets firms manage their portfolio management system and collect all that project data that we discussed for plastic and carbon renewables. That also allows us to create marketplaces, which we can discuss on the next slide. So the reason why, Nicole and Jacobo and, wanted to come to Verra and come to Xpansiv to think about, I know personally that ACC could have direct investment because we've had firms approach us on it, and that's a great way to help develop projects. But when you want to create optionality and flexibility for a project developer, carbon credits are really the most effective market-based mechanism. And going through an exchange really expands the addressable market that project developer that project developer can reach. So as a marketplace, you're improving the efficiency of the settlement process. You're expanding liquidity, bringing more buyers and sellers together. You're also providing counterparty risk protection. So we have many of the major international banks use Xpansiv today for privately negotiated trades, because they would have to go through their credit department to get to for a project developer that may be new. Even if you think about renewable energy, maybe they have one asset under management with a limited financial history. That's not going to get through the credit department. That's going to take 6 months. Many corporations may be the same way. If you go through an exchange, the exchange sits in the middle and helps mitigate that counterparty risk. The exchange also, we collect the credits into cash. There's no delivery risk before those are transferred. So moving on to the next slide. So where we see plastics, and this is the pathway to capital formation that's applicable to any commodity in the market. We have very early days of kind of the formation of a product, trying to find, to one of the questions in the panel, who are going to buy these credits? Who are the natural targets? And there's over 3,000 firms that have made a commitment to the CDP to start to disclose the plastic uses, and now that are setting targets. And there's a variety of different both national and international kind of treaties that are emerging. There's a global plastics treaty, but several countries as well looking at regulation. There's regulation around the EU around plastic reduction. So this is emerging from a regulatory framework as well, where we see that kind of natural demand, which is really the backbone of any commodity market. As we move down, we have very opaque pricing to start. We start to gather transactions like this, like the first sale from the Deekali project on an exchange. And once we get that spot market trading, we enter the transformations phase, which is really where we see the plastics market going today. We have a robust standard that's taken years to develop. We have natural demand. We're starting to have supply come on through Verra and enter the market. And ideally, we want to start to aggregate liquidity and launch things like futures contracts and give more tools to ACC to finance their projects, to be able to project what are they going to receive from the plastics credit. That's how they can continue to operate their existing projects and expand. So I'll move on to the final slide. Our next steps here, and I apologize, we'll have to come back on the questions and we'll be able to follow up directly on those. We have a variety of ways, different markets that we offer through CBL, and basically this is applicable to, again, through any exchange, any commodity market. We have on-screen electric execution for things that are very liquid. We have auctions where people show up and bid in a liquidity event. What we're starting for the plastic market as a next step is a request for quote, which is essentially a closed bid auction where in the next week or two, we'll send out details around the credits, all the supporting information from the webinar around the project, the Verra details, and we'll include the tons, the floor price, and what we'll run is a closed bid auction where we'll allow buyers to come in to place a bid on the credits, to get in touch with ACC and learn more about the project, and then have these credits start to move across the marketplace, efficiently and securely through the Xpansiv infrastructure, but also most importantly, to set a price signal and send that to the market. We want to create lots of price signals for this market. We want to have other projects participate. We want to see that supply in Verra continue to grow, and for this to become a standard practice. And again, looking at this webinar and the impact that the projects have, but also where is the money flow from these credits. We're hoping that we're demonstrating a real life example of how these credits positively impact the project and Senegal, and hopefully future projects for ACC and other developers that are utilizing the Verra standard. So with a minute to go, I don't believe we're going to be able to get to the questions we have. Hopefully we've addressed most of them, the big picture topics through the webinar. We will distribute that RFQ where participants will have the ability to actually place a bid on this initial set of plastic credits, and we'll also supply a variety of information around the Verra program and the project itself. If you could just flip to the last slide. So we have several contacts here. Please feel free to reach out. And as I said, we will follow up shortly with more information, the ability to participate in that request for quote. Thank you to all the panelists for joining. Thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to building this market together. Thank you.